Okay, so we're going to talk about cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle is the muscle that's found in the heart, which is going to be responsible for contracting the atrium and ventricles of the heart to allow the circulation of blood. So if I was to have a look here at some of this muscle tissue over here, what I would end up with, if I was looking at in a closer detail, is my muscle tissue would be sectioned into bundles. So these are bundles of muscle tissue or muscle fibers, sorry. So then what's going to happen is if I was to have a look at one of these bundles and I was to extend one of these bundles out further, or one of these muscle fibers, I'm going to have my muscle fiber, which is my muscle cell. And then in the muscle cell, if I was to bring this down here and to show you in a bit closer detail, so this is my muscle cell here, then I'm going to have my myofibril. So this is a myofibril, which is a section of the muscle cell. So in skeletal muscle, the myofibrils run parallel to each other, like so, so that contraction results in the shortening of the muscle fibers, and so that's going to be useful. So for example, if we have an arm here and I shorten this muscle, then that's going to allow the contraction of the skeleton. So this is in skeleton muscle. However, in cardiac muscle, I'm going to have a slightly different arrangement. My myofibril are going to be branched, and that means that the arrangement is going to look slightly different. Something a little bit more like this. So my myofibril in cardiac muscle is branched, and that has importance because it's going to create a squeezing action over simply a shortening. So my myofibril itself is broken into these individual contractual units, which are called sarcomeres. And in cardiac muscle, I have these intercalated discs, enable the synchronization of this contraction in order to squeeze, in order to generate the action required in cardiac contraction. So if we look at a diagram here, this is our cardiac muscle, and we can see our branched myofibrils, as well as also our inculated discs separating these myofibril muscle fibers into their sections. Okay, so if you can now pause the video and try and place these into the appropriate size. So if we start with 1 as the biggest, all the way down to the smallest. Okay, so have you done that? So we've got muscle tissue being the largest, and then within the muscle tissue we're going to have our bundle of muscle fibers, and then we are going to have our muscle cell, which is going to be made up of our myofibril, which is broken into the sarcomere. And then actually, I forgot to say on the previous slide, but the myofibril, which in this case would be in skeletal muscle, as they're running parallel without being branched, are actually themselves made up of these filaments, which are able to slide past each other in order to create the contraction. So our filaments are our smallest. Okay, so when it comes to the contraction of the heart, what ends up happening is we have if I was just to draw a simplistic diagram of a heart here, just using a sort of rectangle with our 4 chambers, so our right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. I have a group of tissue here which gives out excitation, electrical impulse, and it gives out wave of excitation energy which results in the contraction of the atrium, so that blood will be passed through the right atrium and the left atrium into the ventricles. However, the bottom part of the atrium here has tissue which is unable to conduct the wave of excitation. So we have another group of tissue here which responds to this signal and then produces its own wave of excitation and then results in the contraction of the ventricles from the base up through what we call the Purkinje fibers, Purkinje tissue, and this separated part in the middle here is called the septum. So this group of cells here is called the sinoatrial node, which is commonly referred to as the SAN, and this group of tissue is called the atrioventricular node, often referred to as the AVN. So it is worth noting that we call the muscle in the heart myogenic, which means the muscle will contract and relax rhythmically even if it's not connected to the body. So the muscles of the atrium and the muscles of the ventricle each have their own natural frequency of contraction. So it is also important to note that this slight delay that is caused by the AVN node and the fact that this tissue here is unable to conduct the wave of excitation gives the ventricles time to fully fill before they will be contracted. So we can monitor the electrical activity of the heart using ECG, which stands for electrocardiogram, and this involves attaching numbers of sensors to the skin, and then the electrical activity that is generated by the heart will spread into these sensors, and it can pick up and plot these the excitation created onto a trace. So if this is our trace here, what we end up with is a small rise in excitation energy followed by a slight fall, which we call our P wave, then a sharp increase followed by a fall, which is then going to be called our QTS complex, and then finally a slight rise, which is called our T wave. So the P wave here is representing the atrial contraction, which we call the atrial systole. Our QTS complex is our ventricle systole, so this is the ventricle contracting, and then our T wave is the atrium's refilling, called our diastole. So what we can see then is we can see these traces, and this is a more accurate diagram, but also we can use these traces to assess the presence of any abnormalities that we might encounter. So for example, tricardia, which is a faster than usual resting heart rate. This is our normal ECG trace, and bradycardia, which is a lower than normal resting heart rate, as well as an irregular heartbeat, which can be seen on the bottom. So if you can pause the video and try and explain why you think the QRS complex has a higher peak than the P wave. So hopefully you've done that, and you have mentioned the fact that that is going to be the ventricle contraction phase, which is going to require a large amount of excitation energy in order to contract the ventricles to pump blood either to the lungs or to the body.